Rise and shine, ready or not, here we come. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb, candidate for U.S. Congress, and in the last video installment, we had initiated a discussion about the distinction between R-Naught, reproductive number, which the CDC in previous years had expressly rejected as a rate, and secondary attack rate, the standard metric for assessment of transmissibility risk in an infectious disease scenario. And despite the passage of 2 years, still unidentified officially by national public health authorities like the CDC, which presents operational difficulties for planners engaged in prevention and mitigation of what has been acknowledged by Dr. Anthony Fauci as a virus that has fooled us before, which might be reasonably expected if, as it appears, there has only been a subjective or normative term applied to COVID-19 of being highly contagious, but tied to no articulated, quantifiable metric of risk, specifically assigning to this disease a secondary attack rate, as has been done for other highly contagious diseases like 90% infectious measles and chickenpox, as well as the 60% infectious smallpox, would greatly assist leaders and planners in controlling the situation and developing reasonable measures to reduce risk. I am a military intelligence officer by training, now in retirement, and in the military it is often stated that intelligence drives the mission cycle, which should make sense. And for this reason, when a standard military operations order is published before addressing other paragraphs, tasks to be assigned, such as the mission and the execution of the plan, military leaders will always begin by familiarizing themselves with the situation or a well-developed threat picture for visual learners that will include a description of the adversary forces, their strengths and weaknesses, their disposition, the terrain and the area of operations, the weather and its effects on operations, and other pertinent details that will have an impact upon the execution of a military plan. As Sun Tzu had stated, the battle is won before it is ever fought. And in the military, especially in garrison and in the training environment, military leaders are required to become intimately acquainted with DAPAM 385-30, a regulation that details the composite risk management process, a systematic and methodical process to identify and assess hazards so as to mitigate the associated risks for assisting organizations and individuals in making informed risk decisions in order to reduce or offset risks, thereby increasing effectiveness and the probability of mission success. The risk assessment provides for enhanced situational awareness. This awareness builds confidence and allows soldiers, units, Army civilians, and organizations to implement timely, efficient, and effective protective control measures. So rise and shine, ready or not, here we come. First of all, it is of at least probative value, as Bruce Aylward, the Assistant Director of the WHO, had acknowledged, getting the virus is a function of whether someone's got it, how long they are exposed, and how much virus they are shedding. While on May 7, 2021, the CDC finally conceded that the infectious dose, or exactly how much biological agent in quantifiable terms, would be required to cause an infection, remains unknown, just about a month after its concession on April 11, 2021, that the possibility of infection arising from contact with contaminated surfaces was extremely remote, estimated to be a 1 in 10,000 chance. The CDC has never published a secondary attack rate for COVID-19, as it has done for other highly contagious diseases like 90% infectious chickenpox and measles, or 60% infectious smallpox, which, boys and girls, gives rise to at least a reasonable suspicion. Rather, the CDC, following the lead of the WHO, which had at first assigned a reproductive number, or R-Naught, of 2 to 2.5, has used this metric as the measure of transmissibility risk, and CDC Director Walensky had estimated an R-Naught of 8 or 9 for the Delta variant of concern in October 2021, a variant of concern that had first emerged in India in October of 2020, a year before, and that did not present any imported cases in the United States until April 2021, with the first reported case in Oklahoma on April 10th, a considerably longer temporal interval than the first cases of the original strain. Perhaps, as reported, less infectious, which first reported in the state of Washington on January 20, 2020, and the first imported case involving the Omicron variant of concern that had emerged in South Africa in November 2021, finding the first reported case occurring in California, reported there on December 1st, 2021, did concede that the infectious dose for COVID-19 remains unknown, an anomalous finding. As late as December 2019, Paul Delameter and others had published an entire article on the usage of R-Naught in emergent infectious disease, one of two official CDC publications, and had stated R-Naught is affected by numerous biological, socio-behavioral, and environmental factors that govern pathogen transmission, and therefore is usually estimated with various types of complex mathematical models which make R-Naught easily misrepresented, misinterpreted, and misapplied. R-Naught is not a biological constant for a pathogen, a rate over time, or a measure of disease severity, and R-Naught cannot be modified through vaccinations campaigns. R-Naught is rarely measured directly and modeled. R-Naught values are dependent on model structures and assumptions. Some R-Naught values reported in the scientific literature are likely obsolete. R-Naught must be estimated, reported, and applied with great caution because this basic metric is far from simple. Joachim Rockloff, the author of the report upon which Captain Brett Crozier had relied during the outbreak aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt, had authored a study in December 2020 in which he and others had described R-Naught as only a projection based upon mathematical and stochastic models, and even the CDC had in prior years refused to even describe R-Naught as a rate. However, the CDC had formally recognized secondary attack rate as a standard measure of transmissibility risk, including this metric in its online epidemiology course. But the problem that arose in China, where an R-Naught of 2 to 2.5 was assigned, was that a less than 5% secondary attack rate is 4 times too low, based upon the raw clinical data, to validate the presence of a disease being transmitted from person to person, and 12 times too low to set off a super spreader event. And that initial study conducted by the WHO had employed 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists to review 55,924 laboratory-confirmed cases in China, a very difficult large sample size trace contact study to challenge, but which had assigned an R-Naught nonetheless for COVID-19 that belied the empirical findings that had caused them to expressly conclude it is not clear whether this correlates with the presence of an infectious virus. That was buried, of course, in a 40-page report. That empirical finding was revalidated in October 2020 in the largest sample size tracer context study that had been performed to date, examining over 3 million laboratory-confirmed cases and finding only a 4.6 secondary attack rate. However, by March 2020, far smaller studies, like one case review examining 9 incidents involving between 1 and 47 potential exposures in China, had found what appeared to be a secondary attack rate of 39%, an odd finding of what appeared in presentation to be a super spreader event. but occurring with a disease that was still far below the 60% secondary attack rate threshold, which would raise a reasonable suspicion. By June 2020, Quinlong Jin and others could only report in the Lancet. As of June 8, 2020, the global reported number of COVID-19 cases had reached more than 7 million, with over 400,000 deaths. The household transmissibility of the causative pathogen secure acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS-CoV-2, remains unclear. And by December 2020, Ting Qiang and Yang Huo, after examining cases arising in varying settings in China, could only conclude, much like the initial findings in China, the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 is much higher in households than in other scenarios, which does not sound like a highly contagious disease. This is a rather comprehensive review of trace contact studies, but the point that should become obvious is that even with over 7 million cases of infection worldwide, there are only a few trace contact studies being performed worldwide. That most were small studies, and that all tended to confirm what had been known from the start, that clusters and outbreaks tended to be restricted to households with little wider community spread, belying a conclusion that an infectious, much less a highly contagious disease was present, but rather a disease that required more than casual contact, confined to settings involving extended exposures in restricted confines, which would only be facilitated by lockdowns and stay-in-place orders. Tsuyoshi Ogata and others examined household contact cases that arose between August 2020 and February 2021, involving 496 household contacts and 236 indexed COVID-19 cases, or persons known to have the disease, and found a household secondary attack rate as high as 37.8% between spouses, but only 21.2% for other contacts within that same household. The Osang public health authorities in the Republic of Korea had found between January 24th and March 10th, from among a total of 2,370 individuals who had contact with the first 30 cases of COVID-19, only a secondary attack rate ranging between 0.55% and 7.56%. Rachel Burke and others from the CDC had examined 445 contacts from 12 travel-related cases by February 26, 2020, but found only a 12% secondary attack rate, which was published in the CDC's Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. By April 2020, Yen Ta Huang and others in Taiwan could only find a few studies reporting an estimate secondary attack rate of COVID-19 with a wide range from 0.46 to 63.87%. And all of these studies had examined only a few small cases until December 2020, by which time there were well over 319,000 fatalities in the United States alone. Practically no trace contact studies had been performed at all in the United States, where trace contacts, which had been identified by the CDC during the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa as the most effective and efficient means for case identification and the key to disrupting the spread of that outbreak, had been long delayed for as yet unarticulated reasons. And most of the studies that had been performed had relied upon relatively small sample sizes that had produced an unexplained wide range of secondary attack rates, which is of itself problematic, leaving the scientific community essentially blind, attempting to hit a target that it could not see, or far worse, trying to acquire a target that it did not even have. However, then, relying upon deductive metadata analysis, which is generally rejected in the science community, researchers at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg School for Public Health began to promote a case review of large sample size studies that had been limited to Asia and the Pacific. And that case review analysis could only identify a total of 13 studies from 326 articles, and still yet concluded the secondary attack rate for COVID-19 varies widely across countries, with lowest reported rate as 4.6% and highest as 49.56%. But also that the rates were unaffected by confounders such as population of the country, lockdown status, and geographic location, discrediting the effectiveness of lockdown orders, and further reiterated greater vulnerability of spouse and elderly population for secondary transmission than other household members. And that study found a very low transmission probability during asymptomatic phase, contrary to what had been reported in the press. And that study, promoted by the Bloomberg School of Public Health, was not published by them, but rather by scientists in India. For review, boys and girls, we have spent a considerable amount of time to build a foundation regarding the methodology and process for developing a broader comprehension and understanding of a novel coronavirus that even Dr. Rochelle Walensky has admitted isn't stupid, and that Dr. Anthony Fauci has conceded has managed to fool us before, while human choices in a pandemic have not served us well. And as Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has said, we have learned that we underestimate this virus at our own peril. So, boys and girls, in the next video installment, we're going to dig just a little bit deeper, remove another layer into the topic of secondary attack rate, and what you need to know and should have known after 2 years in a pandemic, to review information that was very available in the open source, but which even found Bruce Aylward, the assistant director of the WHO, publicly lamenting in March 2020 that he had serious doubts that anyone had even read his 40-page report on what 1,800 teams of at least 5 epidemiologists had found in China at the beginning of this public health crisis. This briefing is unclassified. As you were, my name is Major Mike Webb. By God, I am running for Congress. This time, make the right choice, and we shall make America great again. Honest. Carry on. This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb. Honest.